Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb, and today I'm absolutely delighted to have Tom Ungi from True Partnership in the office today. Why I'm excited is we spoke on a panel together a couple of months ago over at the Fixed Protocol event, and I love the conversation and I love finding out a little bit more about you and your business beforehand as well. It's a fascinating backstory, 16 and a half years at Millennium and now forging out this business over the last couple. And it's right in my sweet spot. It's stuff I love talking about. It's an area there I think adds massive value, and we're going to get under all the skin of that and everything else in between, plus talking a little bit about extending the conversation from what we were talking about at Fix, which I think is really important, next generation of talent, people coming through, how the industry can be more attractive, lots of bits and pieces. So we're not going to be shy on conversation on this one, Tom, but look, at the start of these conversations I always say, tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce the company.
So I'm Tom Ungi, and I am a co-founder of a business called True Partnership, and we're in the coaching and development space. We focus primarily in financial services. That's where our niche is. And background prior to that, I grew up in the Northwest, in Liverpool, Lancashire, Cheshire, and I've been down in London since I was 21 years old. And along that journey, I've spent 20 odd years, nearly 25 years in financial services prior to starting this business. First of all, I was on the sales side, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And then I spent the last 16 and a half years of my career at a hedge fund called Millennium. And I was really privileged to be part of a journey where it grew from a very small business in relative terms, of about $3 billion of capital, to a humongous institution that it is today, and then it's gone on from there. So it's been a really interesting journey for me. And along that
must
journey,
have been a great journey as well, by the way.
The Millennium journey. Yeah, it was an incredible journey because at the time when I was joining in 2006, in all honesty, we didn't really know that much about what we should be doing, mate, versus where the organisation is today, and myself. And then we entered 2008. And so we had all these significant events of volatility, changes in markets, geopolitical risk, and the list goes on of events. And so to experience that change, and also to experience some incredible leaders right from the top, and be able to observe, learn from, engage with along that journey, good and bad at times, obviously. It taught me so much also about risk and careers and different areas, and it really formed, I guess, the way I've operated as a leader since.
And so 16 and 16 years, 4 months, I think it was, over there. What was the break point and what led you to doing what you're doing now?
I wouldn't say it was a break point necessarily. Look, I loved, as I enjoyed the sales side as well, I loved my first day, my last day, and pretty much every day in between is the reality. And for me, I'd also been through different evolutions of an organisation, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And about 5 years before I had resigned, I'd actually received coaching myself. And in all honesty, I'd received maybe it was 7 years. The real reason I received coaching was I'd grown up through the ranks of an organisation, been given more responsibility, and the reality was I was probably a little bit lost and underconfident in what I could deliver. And at the same time, I was
underconfident as a leader, or
as a leader, and it manifested itself as well in that I had different issues on a personal basis, and the organisation was incredibly, and certain individuals were incredibly kind to me, and rather than just try and change what they had, they decided to invest time, energy in me, and also to invest in coaching for me. So I received coaching over a 6-month period, and the impact was so significant that I'd done a 180 on the way I'd looked at some things within the world, and particularly the way that I could navigate complex situations. And to be more specific on it, I mean, being curious, gentle, engage with people rather than shouting at people.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I'm being a bit more,
and that was the switch from.
and that was the switch,
yeah.
and it was humongous for me, both in my personal and professional life. And that leads, when you're in that space, to be able to be more creative, more thoughtful, more dynamic. The impact you can have is much larger.
Because you come through from a high pressure environment where I guess in that sort of, stereotypically alpha sort of environment, you've got to be on it, and it probably is quite direct, and a lot of that sort of thing would be the general impression you see from the outside looking in. I guess that would be inbuilt into monkey see, monkey do, right?
I would say so, and I think there's an evolution of that, obviously, versus where a lot of our clients are today in a very different place of being incredibly thoughtful, engaged in their leadership styles, versus where I would have been at that point in time.
Yeah.
So it's more a reflection of me than an organisation. But the change was so significant, I had to know what had happened to me.
Yeah.
And so I went and restudied, and I did a master's over 2 years. In fact, what happened with me...
While still doing your day job,
I was on a trip to New York, and a quant said to me, how long's your travel journey each day? And I said, it's an hour in, an hour home.
Yeah.
Oh, what do you study? And I said, Sopranos, Entourage, and he looked at me like with shame.
Some of the greats, though.
Yeah, some of they are very good. And so I thought about that, and it kept running through my head. I thought, I've got 10 hours a week here to invest in something else. And so I did. I went and studied. I did a master's in coaching and psychology. And I used that 10 hours a week, plus some other time, to really just to explore and understand. I had zero desire to become a coach. That was not the plan. But you take those skills and you bring them into your own leadership, your management and your leadership skills, and try and utilize those skills. And over the course of a period of time, what I realized was I had transitioned from somebody who made sense of the world through numbers and P&L to somebody who thoroughly enjoyed managing people and leading people, to somebody who was really understanding and really interested in what it is that makes people tick and get the best performance out of them. And that is something you can do within a hedge fund, obviously. But I just made that idea that maybe it would be interesting for me to see if I could do it at a broader scale outside of an organisation. And that was really, as I started, so it wasn't really a pivot point, it was more a sense of feeling and change over time that led me to that place.
And I think it's interesting there you talk about someone who can look at how they can improve and develop people and all that sort of thing, to almost like, when you said P&Ls and looking at the pounds at the bottom of a spreadsheet, etc., etc. I think looking at that has a more significant impact on that one than just looking at the P&L sheets as well, right?
Looking at both.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, there's a
if you focus on this, that by nature then improves at the same time as well.
One would hope so. We believe so. Actually, I was reading a study this morning. It was from two PhDs in the US who'd written a paper on the ROI of coaching specifically. And I won't mention what the numbers were because it doesn't really matter, but it was significant, the contribution towards it, which obviously feeds into your point of adding to here. But there's also tertiary benefits associated to it. So if we can get an individual, which all maybe leads down to P&L, I say that with a pause because there are obviously these humongous factors of industry, organisation, market, talent, everything, alpha generation that feeds into really what's going to drive these things. But if we can find really talented people, and we identify very talented people, and we can remove the barriers for them to be even more successful, and to engage better with other human beings within an organisation, the hope is that 1 + 1 = 3 in that context. And that's the ambition, which hopefully will drive a component of being accretive on P&L.
Yeah. So that leads you to saying, right, let's. I think it's probably more purposeful than scratch the itch, but let's start with that. And True Partnerships formed. Yeah. You decide to keep it as a niche within financial services.
Well, no, actually.
Okay.
I decided it is a niche now, but I decided not to. In all honesty, I decided when I set the business up that I would never coach anybody in financial services ever again in my life. And I focused completely on big tech and Formula One teams.
Okay.
And surprisingly enough, or not surprisingly at all, two things happened. One, they didn't ever care who I was or wanted to know me anyway.
Yeah.
So there was no value add component there. And the second thing is, I really missed the industry.
Yeah.
I really thoroughly love the industry.
Yeah.
And all the roles that people play within this industry we get to play within, I really, really am fascinated by it and enjoy it. And I recognise that actually my value add contribution, yes, I've been retrained as a coach, and I hopefully I can provide good service, and so can my peers, my colleagues. But it's the understanding of the pressures, of the dynamics, and that people are experiencing that hopefully is supportive of that. And so I quite quickly found my way back to being in Mayfair, St James, the city. And in fact, actually on our website, I think it says something like, we navigate Bond Street, Liverpool Street and Bank Street, and we sort of traverse up and down those three spots.
Yeah. It's it's interesting you say that as well about missing the space and seeing that. You won't know this, and this is probably I don't mean to overly flatter you in this sort of scenario, but just seeing it at the Fix event and seeing knowing a lot of people who I think we've got over 300 mutual connections on LinkedIn alone and all this sort of stuff. But speaking to people who speak about you, speaks very warmly about you, and I think that's probably something there where it's great to have you still connected to the industry, because there's a lot of respect that you've garnered over time from your time both on the sell and buy side at the same stage, which also probably helps with the ability to use that referenceability, I guess, at the same stage, right?
I see it in a slightly different way. First of all, it's a really nice thing to say, and I'm really grateful, in all honesty. And I find it quite a heartwarming thing to hear in many ways, because if I looked at the point when I received coaching, I'm pretty confident there wouldn't have been those people saying the same thing that day. Yeah. So it's a reflection of the work done afterwards, and actually, that when we try and invest in ourselves and we try and, I don't want to use the term be a better human being, but in my case that was certainly it. Yeah. And a better professional and various other things, that we do have the ability to make some changes. Yeah. And that's what that means to me, as opposed to you were really good at one thing or something. It's more a case of the ability to evolve.
And talk to me about that evolution, because you talked there about the coaching, and then it sort of said, right, why has it made such a profound effect on me, and where's that been? If you were to sort of cite some of the things that you think coaching unlocked in you, what would that look like?
Where do we begin? So I'd say, let me jump on. Here's a few things. So one is the confidence. So confidence is a huge thing, and in reality for me, I was probably at that point in time of my life suffering probably from some low confidence and some lower self-esteem. Now, people wouldn't have recognised that because I was wearing this wonderful armour associated to the industry that we work in, but that's really what I would have been experiencing. And it comes
were you aware of that at that sort of stage? Or?
I wouldn't have called it that. But now, knowing what I now know, I can see how someone else would have seen it more easily in me. And it comes out in certain ways, like I'd never want to be wrong. Because if I was wrong, therefore I wasn't good enough, and there's something that sits underneath that. So I would always try and win the argument. And if I couldn't win it fairly, then you'd aggress a little bit, or whatever that might be. So there's a component of here of, that manifestation, the way that I found this process of coaching quite important for me was trying to understand what it is that made me feel that way, so that I could deal with it and move forward. That was huge. And if I look at the second half of my financial services career, it was very common for me to go into a room and say, my view is that we should all go left. And then we'd have the conversation, and I'd go, change my mind completely, I think we should all go right. And be completely comfortable with that change in decision, knowing it was, and being proud that you could take another information. So that was one component I would think about. A second component in here is really to remove what I would describe as binary thinking. And a frustration I'd had at the time was that I like to run really, really quickly with whatever I do. And if everybody can't run at that pace, then it's not good enough. Or they're not good enough, or something of that nature. And that's not the reality.
Sort of classic red personality profile type.
Exactly. And it's not, it's wrong. And so I learned that, yes, I have a skill to be able to put drive and energy into something, but it's useless unless I can take everyone along with the journey with me and utilize everybody's skills and the value contribution that they make.
Yeah.
So an appreciation of other people, that was the second big thing. And the third one was recognizing, and this is also, it's a component of selfishness, I think, that the world didn't revolve around me. The world did not revolve around Tom. And actually, the role that I was in that case, in that organisation, my role was really, okay, to keep things safe and happy and try and evolve a business that we were working on and be creative and live out the business plans of the greater organisation. But it was also to identify talented human beings and help them develop. In a way that I hadn't experienced myself in the early part of my career, because in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was still a world when you went onto a trading floor where you were told the way to behave. It was very one way, the conversation. It's very different to the way it is today, obviously. And I was gifted with being able to be part of that, being able to see, okay, actually, how do I develop each individual in a different way? And they're real privileges for me.
You mentioned some very interesting stories at the Fix thing, which I'll come on to in a minute about that, about how you look at people and look to find hidden talent. And I think those sort of things are very important as you sort of progress as a leader as well. Everything you just mentioned, I think, is a fascinating sort of journey of self-discovery in that. And I guess when you move into that and start looking at people who you're working with and starting to coach now, there's going to be a whole plethora, as you say, of different people with different sort of motivations. And I think it's really, why I said this is really interesting is, despite the fact we've seen 20 years of evolution since probably both of us first started looking at the industry, there is still this sort of, I think, overarching sort of, I guess almost, I don't know if it's the right sort of word for it, but it's almost like there's almost a fear in the industry because it is such a high-pressured, high-paced sort of environment with big stakes at the end of it. So I always think that it's sort of driven a level of conservatism and playing safe almost, because people don't want to get fired and they don't want to be seen to push the envelope, etc., etc. So within that, you see some of the behaviours there that I don't think necessarily get people to the top. I think sometimes it inhibits the teamwork that can get into it and the best practices that you'd really want to see in a genuine high-performing environment. And I think something around the role that you can play into that is to sort of coach this next wave of thinking within it, having walked the talk and seen something better and seen your evolution within it. The issue I sometimes see with it is that speaking to people in this sort of space, they can get quite defensive on it, and there is a lot of you sort of termed it, I didn't term it exactly, but hubris was that sort of piece, and you want to be there and you want to be seen as the person to have the answers, to be argue your way from it, driven by insecurity or just a sheer-minded, bloody-minded belief, which you have to have in that space at various stages as well. And I do think it's kind of like a Premiership footballer and being in a hedge fund and one of the star strikers in that sort of environment, that there's a lot of eyes on you at that sort of stage, and everyone wants to sort of believe and build into the hype and the story of it all, right? So I guess what I'm interested in is how people are adapting to that sort of thing, and how you have to break down those sort of barriers as a coach, and how then you get to the wins to allow people to go through the sort of journey that you've been on.
There's a lot in there.
There is. I've thrown about 15 questions each.
So I'll try and describe it a little bit, how I think about it. I've built a leadership program recently on this, and we're still debating exactly the shape of it with my colleagues. And I think I'm right, but okay.
Let's go left.
Let's go left. But just to come back on it, there's I think within really, really talented people, first and foremost, in whichever field, whether it's in the head and recruitment space, whether it's in the data space, whether it's in the hedge fund space, investment banking, the brokerage space, whichever it is, really talented people, I think, have a level of humility associated to them. And I think that's an observation that I continually would make, and a confidence that comes from that humility. And so I don't know if they look like Premiership footballers, because the reason I think about that is that we can over-glamorise certain things sometimes, but there's a reality that whatever role someone plays in this industry, ultimately we should be trying to drive value for somebody, and hopefully that's an investor at the end of the day. in all of these things that we're doing. And the way that I think about where we operate, it's almost that there's a tree here, and the roots in the leadership space are very much, or in the performance space, are very much in the foundational pieces. How do I delegate? How do I manage a time? Process driven. And then the trunk is more a case of these are situations about such as how do I communicate? Passive, aggressive types of communication, assertive communication. And then the branches, which is probably where we start with them from a coaching perspective. Now we do workshops where we teach all of these things, but from a coaching perspective, it's really from where the branches, and the branches are where we connect with other people within the organisation. That's an observation of new managers or people within hedge funds, certainly, where there is now an increasing demand of how do we get these human beings to connect. And then right at the top of when you get to the blossom, leaves, fruits, and that sort of stuff, that is it's almost like a transformational component in here, with some of the areas I discovered when I was working, of how do we navigate these incredibly complex situations such that I can be more value added in what I deliver to the organisation, as a leader, as a performer, whichever it may be. And so I think about it in this structure, and the coaching component is generally around the leaves. It's right there. It's right at the end point. It's the stuff you can't get from the teaching.
Yeah.
Now the coaching component, there's also something that's in here, which is the coach's job is to work alongside an individual, open the doors so that they can see what's on offer, and to help them navigate through them, or for the person not to go through them. But it's the person's job. And the coach, the same as a football coach or a sports coach or whatever it might be, they're working with the talent. They're not trying to change the talent, because they're not broken. So it's really about what is going on inside for you, Toby, that we can make you even better performer at what you do.
Unlock that extra potential.
Unlock that extra potential, exactly. And in some cases, depending on the seniority of the individual and the size of their impact on an organisation, 1% marginal gain could be quite significant. And so that's where I think about us operating.
Did you go in there when you went on this coaching journey yourself? Did you go in there demonstrably open to it, or were you sort of doing it under duress and saying, right, okay, we can go through this sort of thing, or was it something you drove, or was it something that came to you? And what was your attitude to say, did you think this is going to be something there that takes me to another level, or do you think this is a necessary evil?
It's a really good question, and I'm trying to remember, and I can't really remember completely, and I think because I was a bit of a broken individual at the time, but I didn't think of it as necessary evil. I saw it as an opportunity, absolutely. I was incredibly grateful to the organisation at the time, and there was probably a part of me that was thinking, hopefully this can fix me such that the organisation will see me in a better light. It's sort of describing them. So I saw it as a bit remedial in its way, shape, in the way we describe it. Now, if I look at the work that we do, when coaching specifically, in the last 2 years, I can only think, and we've coached hundreds of people. I can only think of one case which I would describe as remedial.
Okay.
One. And the reason being, the hedge funds that we engage with, the asset managers that we engage with, they're really focused on driving their best performing people to and supporting them to try and get to a different level. And that's where they're thinking about their own alpha within that space. So it's very rare that we'd be in a remedial context. And I'm smiling because there is one hedge fund that I said no to working with them because of the nature of the way they couldn't see the work. Okay. Is that vague enough what I just said?
Yeah, I think so.
Hopefully, yeah.
I know who you mean. No, I'm joking.
No, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know who this is. But it was for us to do well. For us to do well, I consider that through creating value for somebody else. And if we're not going to do that, then we don't. I have a hard line that we don't do the work. Because I don't want to take somebody's money to give them like minimal impact. It's like I'd rather they give that money to somebody else and let us work with a client we think we can have real impact with. So that's a starting premise for how I want to think about our true partnership with our clients. Now, when we have the organisation that's bought in, and an individual that's bought in, and hopefully a sponsor that's really bought in, the chances of success for us are incredibly high. If somewhere along that line, someone's not bought in, it's difficult for us to have real impact.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's important.
And that's your job to make sure you suss that out when you're doing the discovery piece about whether you can work with that client.
Absolutely.
You mentioned before we came on air that the sort of business now has grown to sort of 20, 21 people, which is fantastic over that sort of period in that sort of space, because quite often that coaching piece is sort of more of a 1 and 2 man band and building out and creating those relationships and driving those sort of things through. How does it work with that? So you mentioned there that you sort of will work with the companies that you do. Do you do the discovery sort of piece? You're there at the front of the relationship, and then you have a team. How does it work in practice?
No idea. So the best thing for me to describe it is, let's think about the starting point of why we have 20 people. And the reason we have 20 people is because one of the first clients that came to me and asked me to coach them on a topic was helping a female leader to find her voice in the boardroom. And I said, I can help you through that process, I believe, and I might be a 6 out of 10, but I know someone who specialises in that spot. Go with them, meet with them, come back to me, whatever suits you, I'm good with. And they met with the other person, went with the other person. And my mindset got into, wouldn't it be interesting if I looked at all these different skill sets that we provide, that we have specialisations in, and we brought them all together. And we had people who'd been educated in different places, but still had that layer of financial services experience. And so the amount of what I have today is 20, 21 people. Nearly all of them worked in the city. Portfolio managers, traders, investment bankers, etc., or lawyers. And have all then transitioned to be coaches, and all have slightly different skills. And what I'm just describing in my mind was building a multi-strat hedge fund, equivalent, a multi-strat coaching community, and that's what I wanted to deliver. So whatever the client presents to us, if we don't have what is required, it'll trigger for us, okay, do we need to go and augment this? And every now and then we do get a client that comes to us and says, do you have this? And I'll stop and I'll say, no, I don't, but I'll go and find it for you. And then I see that's my job, and then I'll go and I'll hand that over to them, and we step out. There's no commercials for us, but we've done the right thing. So that was the reason for it. Now the way the process works is, myself and my co-founders, Caroline and Brad, will generally be in the initial conversations with an organisation, sponsor, HR, whoever that may be. And once that relationship's in place, then what we'll do, if there's a piece of work to be done, the next stage is for one of us to meet with the individual who's going to be coached. Let's say it was you. And we'll spend 30, 40 minutes together. It's actually like a mini coaching session. And at the end of it, I'll say, okay, I believe that the challenges you want to work on are A, B, and C. You agree? Great. I think the right people for you to meet are this person, this person, this person, this person. These are the reasons why. We then give them the full bios. They choose 2 people to meet with. They have generally a Zoom call for what we call a chemistry call, and the Zoom just to save their time. They choose an individual, and then we start the coaching process. And what that looks like is there's what we call a tripartite conversation, coach, coachee, and their manager, to agree that the things we're going to work on, and then we begin the work. And we normally meet once a month for circa 9 months, and at the end of it we have that same conversation again with the 3 to have a look at impact. And that's it.
Isn't it fascinating? And what I love about this is that it's an industry that's embracing this sort of thing, right? When I think I look at this, I'm a big sports fan, and I've always been fascinated by sports psychology and marginal gains and data. And if you look at sports teams, they've got multiple £1 million worth of talent that they've invested into, and they want to use every single skill at their disposal to be able to increase the profitability of those investments. So we worked for many years with a sports psychologist who's become a good friend of mine, and he has always been of the belief that the sort of, I guess, the tenements of sports psychology translate across into sales and any other areas of, I guess, human performance at various different phases. And I found it incredibly useful and valuable for our leadership team, for our team, for everything around that. And I don't think it was commonplace in our industry specifically to have that same sort of thought process around how we can unlock potential within it. And I think Billions has obviously had a popularised version of this, where there's psychologies in where that goes through, albeit in a quite different space. But I do think it's incredibly promising that the industry is recognising the potential that coaching and psychology can have on the performance of individuals, even down to the fact that there's technology businesses that I think are amazing, who look at the analytics of when is the best time for people to trade and what sort of their thing. To me, it's real investment around performance and getting people to play at their best, and the industry seems to be taking up that up very well.
Humongously. I don't know how lucky we were with Billions, because it definitely helped us. But at the beginning of our journey, we were making a lot of outgoing calls to try and curate that information. Then a number of the prime brokers did surveys into seeing if this was a valuable service to the hedge fund clients and asset managers. The feedback was yes. And our phone, we have more incoming than we have outgoing calls nowadays.
Brilliant.
Okay, and the basis is because of interest and intrigue. Not necessarily, we're not the only show in town, but it's because they're interested, which is fantastic. And I think about it as absolutely, there are components where we can support individuals to achieve even more, so they can have greater impact on their organisation and their careers, etc. Hopefully, we're going to make them happier. And actually now, if we fast forward to 5 years from now, I'm going to be surprised in the hedge fund space, the asset management space, maybe even the investment banking space, if people are going to take roles where they don't have access to coaches, because it's becoming a real retention tool for the industry as well, and which makes a lot of sense to me. And so there's this transformative sort of evolution of the industry and also the coaching space. Hopefully we can add value to that. There is a commercial component to it, of course, so that's the sustainability of a business. But really, it's the impact that I care about. In all honesty, as my business partners would tell you, I'd do it for free. Yeah. Because I've seen in our industry that we work in, the loneliness of leadership, the darkness of losing money and P&L, and et cetera, and the opportunity to shed a bit of light in that space is a really, really valuable component. I think it's required in our industry. I don't know other industries well enough, which I'm sure it is as well. So there's going to be an evolution of this. And then the final thing I'd say on that is that I didn't expect this to be the case, but I would say, if you look at the hedge fund space now, probably almost 30, 40, 50, maybe 50% of people actually are in the technology space. And we're coaching more and more leaders who joined an organisation 10 years ago. They're now building out teams and new roles for them. And the number of people that we're coaching in the technology space and also neurodiverse individuals has exasperated in this sort of last 8-9 months. So we've got these interesting trends that are happening for us, both on the investment and non-investment side of the industry.
It's a great point, that, because it goes back to the same sort of thing as you see many sort of star traders then sort of move their way through and then become, I guess some of the very traits that made them good at their job effectively then move into things in leadership which are completely almost the polar opposite of what they what made them good in one thing, and expect them to immediately port it over to something else. And it's the technology side of things, and when you talked about quants earlier on, and there's definitely links to more neurodiversity in those sorts of spaces, and there are the difficulty you see people who become sort of Peter's principle over promoted into roles where they don't have necessarily the skill sets to be able to do that and feel lost, and the anxiety and the pressure that comes up to being doing something there which you haven't been necessarily trained for, but you've had that natural progression, and suddenly it becomes a hell of a lot more difficult than when you were doing something you were completely comfortable in.
Absolutely.
It's so important, right?
It is, and I'm smiling internally and catching myself. Shall I say it? Shall I not say it? No, it's nothing bad. One of the most common things I see on people we're coaching, whether that be a high-performing portfolio manager, a hedge fund manager themselves, a head of a part of a business within a hedge fund manager, or an asset manager, or a bank, trader, operations, whatever it may be, is they get into a role, and they're in this role, and they know what they do, and they know how to do it, and they know some of their frustrations, but there's a certain question which not very few people know the answer to, and it's this: it's what do you need? What do you actually need? do you need praise? Do you need to understand more about an organisation? Do you understand what do you need to make you feel most comfortable, to be most successful, such that, to use the words we were talking about earlier, you can maybe adopt a little more creativity in the role you play, or take a bit more risk in however you do that. So you can take on big or be more strategic.
Yeah.
What is it you need? And people don't often have the language associated to that. Some very basic questions.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Simon, this psychologist I was talking to you about beforehand, what I love about his work is he is just superb at simplification.
Yeah.
And I think that's often the case for it. And when you talk about language like what do you actually need, brilliantly simple, and Simon's terminology is common sense and common practice are often not the same sort of place. So nothing he's ever told me, and I read prolifically around all these sort of subjects, there's nothing there that ever seems completely revolutionary, but it's just the story and the navigation of what happens with it that becomes really interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I want to just move on to what brought us together in the first place, which was we were at the Fix MEA trading conference. We were on a fantastic panel with next generation of fixed talent within that, and the whole piece there was about nurturing and supporting talent. I loved what you had to say on some of that. I think both of us were the two older statesmen in the whole conversation, weren't we? But it was I think a hugely inspiring conversation to be involved in, and we've both seen various people come through the industry. I think what was exciting about these guys is they came from such a diverse background. Yeah. From people who, there was a young lad on there who'd come into it from a background that was so investment banking, and was thriving in what he was doing. There was a refugee on the panel. It was a really different sort of group of people that I thought were really encouraging about how they went about it and did things. And you told a story then, and I'm sure you remember it, but about someone who you'd invested in and who came from a complete, and you were very deliberate when you were recruiting. I guess this is back in the Millennium days, about how you could take that sort of punt, but it didn't become a punt; it became something different. But it was on paper and CV wise, that was not something which would be at all suited to what you wanted to go through. So, will you bring that story back to life for me?
I can do, or I can tell you a different one.
Go on. Then.
What would you like?
Oh God, this is true. Let's go with tell me a different one.
A different one, okay.
Yeah.
And the reason I say different is that I go a different one is because I met this person yesterday.
Okay, perfect.
Right. And I met. This was going back a number of years. I had a meeting with a bank, and the bank told me that I did a number of things wrong. Doesn't matter who the bank was or exactly what I was doing wrong. And there was a number of these things I was doing wrong as an individual for part of the business that I was running. And I said, how should I do it better? And they said, well, we've got this young lady over in our place who's incredible, and she knows exactly how to do it. I said, can I please meet her? And so they sent her over at 2:00 that afternoon to our building. And I met this young woman, not conventional from a banking background, no university degree or anything like that, and quite an interesting past, right? And she started to talk to me about how she operates, and I was so intrigued by her and curious about her that we got on really well. I actually asked her to stay. She stayed for 4 hours. At the end of it, I went and got our CEO, I said to him, I need you to make an offer with me to this young lady today, and we're not going to let her leave without signing the contract. And so that's what we did. And she joined that day. And so she went from a very junior role at a bank into a role that we were creating from nothing. And she said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, either do I. We'll figure it out. And we did, and we figured out this part of the business. And that part of that business grew really, really big. Not only within that organisation, but also within the industry. Okay, she was incremental in building out everything around that. Yeah, and she wasn't polished from a banking sort of perspective. Yeah, but she was incredibly smart, incredibly curious, solution focused, and could handle people incredibly well. Right? So she had these amazing attributes that I think are some of the best that I've ever seen somebody deliver on this area of the business. And I met her yesterday, where she's at another tier 1 global hedge fund in an even more senior position, in fact, significantly more senior position, absolutely thriving in this role. And we were catching up, and she was describing the attributes of how she's delivering, and I think she's going off to see prime ministers at different countries and things like that at the moment. So she's very senior. And the interesting thing was what she's delivering to that organisation where she is today, and what she was delivering, what I saw in that first meeting, are exactly the same things. Curiosity, relationship-driven, drive, determination, honesty, creativity. They're the components. And this, for me, is the attributes like this, for me, are real drivers of diversity. When you've got there's some of the drivers that we need. We need greater levels of diversity to be able to have more of these drivers, is what I'm trying to articulate. And then don't always come from conventional places, people. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's also nothing wrong if somebody does come through a conventional background of going through, conventional. Maybe they've gone to school, they've done A-levels, they've gone to university, whatever they've done, or gone through a grad program. There is nothing wrong with that as well. Yeah. It's the attributes.
That's I think a really important part of it, isn't it? Yeah, because it's not to say, right, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater and completely rip up the form book, but I do wish that people would spend more time thinking about the individual. And when you talk about those attributes and those sort of common traits, it's also, once you've identified those, is actually testing them where they don't just become ticks of a question to ask in an interview with someone with a generic reply, but how do you dive into that and get a real feel for it? And I think that story, the one you mentioned at the fix, the fix thing is about getting to know people, and I guess that's something there which would have been a natural sort of strength of yours to do that sort of thing. Because going back to that piece I said before about conservative in the industry, is no one wants to be fired for making a bad hire. Yeah. No one wants to pack their team with risk in an industry that, whilst has risk at its very core, generally it's quite conservative in terms of the playbook of how it plays out, to have some self-preservation about what people are doing.
Absolutely.
But you took that was part of your DNA to sort of look for those things and look for those people, which I imagine accelerated you forward in your career to levels you got to in one of the biggest hedge funds in the world.
Look, humbly speaking, I think the organisation was set up to take those sort of natural risks around people, and I think the great organisations today are set up to take those natural risks about people. And I was an individual within that organisation who was allowed to take allowed to do that. Yeah. So the organisation rather than me, in all honesty, but I do think it's really important, and the point you make around risk, and I think about interviews. God, I've seen so many interviews when I've gone with somebody and I've been the senior person with someone else in the room, and I've seen them start an interview, and I'm thinking, if I was being interviewed, I wouldn't come and work here. No way. Because people are so nervous in interviews, and you know that because you get them through the interview process for a living, right? Yeah. And I remember personally once being incredibly nervous. And it was this, and I went to a dinner. There was 8 people at the dinner, and the guest of honour at the dinner was Michael Bloomberg. And I was like a junior at party versus some of these senior people in the room, and I figured I'd be on the edge somewhere. We got into the room, I was like right next to him, and they'd all prepared conversations for Michael Bloomberg. And I had nothing. And I sat down, and he recognised I had nothing. And I was quite nervous. And he said, "I'm Michael, what's your name?" And I said, "I'm Tom." He goes, "Do you live far away?" I said, "I live about an hour away in Buckinghamshire." He goes, "Did you get the train?" I was like, "Yeah, I got a train in." And basically went through these small questions with me. Yeah. And what he was doing was relaxing me. Yeah. And I thanked him at the end, and I sent him a note the next day, and he sent me a nice note back. And I recognised right then that it's small skills. So when we enter into those meeting rooms, we have to start with building connection. And if we want to hire diverse candidates within the industry, whether that be from whatever form of diversity we want to think about, the very concept that they're feeling slightly different when they're in that meeting room means it's our job to build first and foremost connection. Yeah. Once we have the connection in place, that's where we can get into us to be curious and ask them the questions so we can drink out those key components. Yeah. Like, what did you like doing as a kid? Yeah. You know, I really like puzzles. Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Why? You know,
there's always going to be stuff on the CV that sort of leads to that sort of conversation. I agree with you. You know, I think sometimes people get it wrong that an interview becomes an inquisition, and there's a massive difference between the two parts of it. And I think companies still fail to secure the best talent by making it, why should you come and work for me? Whereas I think it should be that thing of saying, look, we want to put our best foot forward here in a competitive landscape,
yes,
and say this is why you should be, you know, coming on board with us, and do that two-way interview where it is a sell for both sides of it. And maybe that's a confidence piece as well, potentially, with how people are doing it, and a training piece and a coaching piece about how to, you know, actually put yourself forward in those interview pieces as well. Which I don't think there is a formula for.
No, there's definitely training to be done there. But I mean, I have to admit that when I see it now versus, you know, time before, early parts of my career, I see it with our best clients. They're incredibly focused on this. They're incredibly focused on having the right talent, keeping the right talent, nurturing the right talent, and training people how to engage. We've got one client right now who came to us, and there's one individual who's neurodiverse within a group of 6. And the conversation right from the get-go for their mindset wasn't, what do I do with this individual? It was, how do I teach and train the rest of the team, or engage with the rest of the team, so we can get the best out of each other as a collective?
Yeah.
It's a very different way of thinking.
It is,
and it's impressive.
And it's been quite, you know, recent as well, hasn't it? Because I smirk a little bit because I sort of transport myself back. Maybe 10 years or so ago, we were working with a hedge fund who we made a breakthrough with, who'd been struggling to hire these people. It was technologists who they were looking to bring on board, and they were just unable to get people over the line. And we spoke to them, and it's actually one of our more junior guys fronted up to the CTO, who was one of the most influential CTOs in the space at that sort of stage, and said, "You're killing your chances of getting these." And no one had said this to him beforehand. And he basically said, look, the process you're doing is putting people off, you're not going to do it, and basically people aren't going to want to work for you. And we ended up and within weeks we started making multiple placements with him, and it was a complete transformation of the whole process, which was, and fair play to this guy who was, as I say, only a year or so into his career at that sort of stage. He just had the personality to sort of push back and say that. Anyway, this CTO then asked me to come into this dinner in Mayfair with 25 other hedge fund CTOs in there and tell them that they were arrogant and terrible at interview. And I said, this is an awful decision to do it. And he insisted, and I sort of did a sort of fairly polite version of it. Fortunately, it was just when they brought in the main course, and no one could give a shit about what I was saying at the same time anyway. But it did make me think, and at that sort of stage, it was, you know, why should you ordain to work for us the most, you know, these, and I think over time it's become something that has become a lot better at that sort of stage. Still way to go, I think, and I think a lot of it is around the coaching of individuals to do that. So, look, this is a conversation I knew I could talk about for and I feel like we could be going for another 4 or 5 hours ourselves, you know, going through this. So I'm going to finish off with you talking about your business at True Partnership and say, all right, where does it go at the moment? What's the next plans of it? You've done so much so soon in its real terms. You're obviously, as you say, coaching hundreds of people, having some real impact in the sort of space. As I said, the feedback I've had from people I know around it has always been super, super positive, which was what I was so excited about bringing you in today. So tell us where it goes from here afterwards. I'm imagining that might be fluid in terms of just the way that you look at things in the same sort of space. But where can it go? Where do you think it goes? And also, who should be reaching out to you, and how do they do that?
So where does it go? I don't know. In all honesty, it's like, you know, I don't know. But I know we'll figure out. In the near term, it's our job to engage with more people within the financial services industry and to showcase what we can deliver and how we can deliver it.
Yeah.
That's our job to do. And I'm hopeful that there will be other organisations that will pop up that do similar things to us.
Yeah.
But no issue with that whatsoever. And because that means that, one, we're doing something right, and there's value in it, and then more people are getting the service. And that's the value comes into the key component. We've already started to expand into Dublin, because our clients are in Dublin, as well as London, and we pretty shortly will be expanding into Dubai. And then there's a conversation about New York and Miami because our clients have been asking for this, and so we're going to go where clients drive us to really grow. If we can find the right people, and we can still deliver what I believe to be our core values, And if we can deliver upon that, we'll continue to grow in that way. And from there, we've got some interesting ideas, which we're bouncing around with the leadership team at the moment. And I have to admit, I have strong views, and they're getting pushed back quite hard. And so I'm not winning those battles at the moment.
You're moving more right than left.
I am, unfortunately, and I think they're probably right, and I'm probably wrong. And we also have a very senior advisory board that we brought into for the organisation, and they don't agree with my views on long-term growth as well. So I have to pause and recognise it. But the reality is, we want to have impact for human beings. We want human connection, and that's really, really important to us. And to allow people already to support people to have more impact on a personal and professional life.
Yeah.
And that's really important to me. So if we can continue on that vein, I'm really, really good.
Yeah.
Big, small, fine. I'm fine with that. And that's it. That's all we want to do.
And getting in touch with you, you kind of intimated beforehand who you're helping, but there's specifics of who should be reaching out and getting in touch with you, and what's the best way for them to do that?
Anybody can reach out to us, to be honest with you. We've got a strong team, and they can reach out to us on LinkedIn or through our website, or whichever way they want to, or just drop me an email. And we'll help where we can. And sometimes, in all honesty, it's people haven't got it fully baked in what they want to do. They've just got an idea of we want to try and start a conversation. And my philosophy is always never contact us with thinking that we're going to have an expectation that you're going to write a ticket or do business with us. It's not what we're about. We're about long-term true partnerships, long-term relationships. And so it's building those over time, and we're very, very relaxed with that. And I've had plenty of conversations where somebody's come to us and we've got down to the point of price, and it's this doesn't work for our organisation. No problem. We'll step back. There are other people who can probably do it, but I don't want to leave you with nothing. So here's some resources, either books or YouTube or whatever it might be. I think they may be helpful to you.
Yeah.
So wherever it is, we're going to try and have impact, and that's all about impact for us.
Fantastic. And just to talk about impact, and you mentioned LinkedIn beforehand, I've got to say, I've just, since we met, I've been seeing your sort of Thursday thoughts and weekend updates and all that sort of stuff. If you're not following Tom on LinkedIn, I highly recommend it. There's been some great little pearls of wisdom, and I've written them down in my trusted book over here and all that sort of stuff. It's really enjoyable to see the whole sort of journey. So Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in.
Thanks so much, Toby. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on board, and thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on the next episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.